Hi guys, welcome back to video 2 on carbon cycling. Okay, so in the last video, we finished off by looking at peat formation. So what we're really doing within this unit is we're looking at how carbon is taken in by the parts of the environment and where it's released in parts of the environment. And we've got to remember that carbon isn't just in the form of pure carbon, that it's often lots in other forms as well, such as carbon dioxide, okay, which is what is absorbed from the atmosphere by plants and released in respiration. Okay, in water it can be in the form of carbonic acid. Okay, when water absorbs CO2, it can form carbonic acid. We also looked at it in the form of being in methane. Okay, CH4, and finally we looked at what's on the image here, which is peat. Okay, which is what we get when organic matter is broken down in an anaerobic acidic environment. Okay, so we're going to go on now and start looking at coal, oil and gas formation, because there is lots of carbon that gets stuck in coal, oil and gas. And of course carbon and hydrogen are our energy molecules, so these are where our energy is coming from within these things. So we need to discuss how these processes happen. So coal is formed. You can see here the first one is coal. Generally that's formed when deposits of peat. So peat's the stuff we looked at in the last video. When they get buried under other sediments and the peat is compressed and heated, and it gets turned into coal. You can see here in this image. Okay, here's the swampy area. So you've got anaerobic conditions, impartial breakdown of organic matter. Okay, gets covered in water, gets compressed, heated, and chemically changed, and ends up as coal. For oil and natural gas, the process is slightly different. So these guys, oil and natural gas, are formed in the mud at the bottom of seas and sometimes lakes as well. Again, conditions are anaerobic, okay, so there's no oxygen available for decomposition for those bacteria that break it down, or the fungus that break organic matter down normally. So basically then, as these things settle on the ground and more mud and sediment settles on top of them, it gets compressed and heated, and those chemical changes occur over time. Okay, so you can see the sand, silt, and ocean all the way on top of it, until eventually these chemicals get changed into oil and gas deposits. So the majority of the gas that's left there is, of course, the gas we've been talking about before, which is methane. Okay, and what tends to happen then is when these get covered in rock, they get trapped in little pockets of rock. And sometimes when they escape, they can be traced. Obviously, it's a huge industry is trying to extract these oil and gas deposits, although the deposits are finite, which means they're running out. Of course, we have the problem is that when they get burnt, which is what we're going to come on to next, they do produce a lot of carbon dioxide gas, okay, which is going to lead to more global warming, which is again something we're going to touch on more a little bit later on. So we know that things like coal, oil and gas can be combusted. Yeah, if they're heated up to a high temperature, in the presence of oxygen, they set on fire. Okay, and when they set on fire and light, they release a lot of their own energy. And the process is called combustion. So what we get out of that is we get fuel going in this case it's methane here, okay, reacting with oxygen, giving out carbon dioxide and water. So it's very, very similar to our respiration equation, but it's very much less controlled. In some places, it's a natural thing. Here you can see forest fires happening. Now, these forest fires in some places or parts of the world are a natural phenomenon. They happen every year. And generally what they do is they cause seeds to drop off the trees into the ground, which will start the germination process. In other forests, in other parts of the world, it's not a natural thing, it's a man-made thing. So crops of sugarcane, for instance, are burned just before they're harvested because they want to burn off all the dead leaves, leaving the stems which have got the sugarcane on them. So that's an example of where humans can affect this. Of course, you've also got fossil fuels being burnt, like we mentioned. We've got coal, oil, and gas, and you can see here this is a fossil fuel place where coal, oil, and gas are being burnt, producing huge amounts of carbon dioxide and releasing huge amounts of carbon dioxide back into the environment again. Okay, more on combustion when we look at the global warming. Limestone formation. So this is one you probably haven't encountered so much before. We've got to remember that some of our animals, especially ones that live on the ocean, they have hard body parts that are composed of calcium carbonate, CaCO3. Okay, calcium carbonate. So mollusks, things like mussels, sea snails. Okay, they're shells that we see them. They walk along the seabed on. Okay, these are made of calcium carbonate, and also, of course, hard corals that build reefs have their exoskeletons, which are also made of calcium carbonate. So when these animals die, their soft parts decompose very, very quickly. So the actual guts, their internal organs, they decompose quite quickly. But in acidic conditions, the calcium carbonate may also dissolve. But if the conditions are just right, which is for the most part in our oceans, the conditions are not so acidic, it's nice and neutral, or even just slightly alkaline, the hard parts of the animals will form on the seabed, and in shallow tropical seas, calcium carbonate is also deposited by precipitation of water, and the result is, of course, this rock called limestone. If you've ever been to the UK onto the south coast, you may have seen the White Cliffs of Dover. These are made of chalk. Chalk is a type of very much calcium-rich rock. And it's a form of limestone that consists entirely of very small unicellular animals called foraminifera. And basically, the entire cliffs of the Cliffs of Dover are made from the remains of these animals, okay, which is pretty impressive. So limestone can form some pretty amazing structures. And again, there's a lot of carbon in these areas, okay, in the form of these places. So that's quite important to remember. So here again is back to that simplified carbon cycle. It's probably looking a little bit less scary now than it was before. A couple of key words we might want to remember are the words a pool. Okay, so a pool is where we get a reserve of carbon. So here's a reserve in plants. So the carbon found in the sugars and all the organic materials in plants and in animals, that is a pool of carbon. Another pool is the pool of carbon that we find within the atmosphere in the form of methane and carbon dioxide. Another pool is in fossil fuels that's stored in the ground. Okay, another pool would be the carbon that we find in the oceans, either dissolved in the water or within the aquatic plants or animals or the organic. Okay, so those are our pools. The second word we might want to remember is the word flux, and a flux simply refers to the transfer of the element from one pool to another. So let's use the example of coal. So in the station here, the coal goes into the power station and it's combusted, all right, and the carbon that's stored chemically in the coal is converted into carbon dioxide, and that returns to the atmosphere. So we would call that a flux. I'm just going to show the last slide. Shows the carbon fluxes going on around the world, and these are quite interesting. And we're talking about huge amounts, okay? So when we're looking at these numbers, we're talking in gigatons, okay, or in gigatons per year. So this is the amount within the flux. So if you're looking here, look, you can see carbon coming from the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide, probably, definitely, into plants or into terrestrial plants. Okay, so this is photosynthesis. So it's 120 gigatons, okay, of carbon are taken in, not carbon dioxide, but carbon itself are taken in by the plants during photosynthesis. In a second example here, you can see that in respiration, if you look at, let's have a look at the oceans here. Look, so you can see here surface oceans are taking in about 90 gigatons of that carbon. And you can see also that about 90 gigatons are leaving the ocean, okay, as well. So it's kind of balanced. Now, if we look at these fluxes, they generally are quite balanced. So the amount, for instance, that is taken in from photosynthesis here would also roughly equal the same amount that is given out from respiration, for instance. Okay, so generally these processes are balanced, but of course, problem is that it's not completely balanced, and carbon dioxide levels are increasing. Okay, so that's going to lead us into our next unit, whereby we're going to be looking at how scientists are tracking CO2 levels and monitoring what's happening to them and the actual knock-on effects and the effects of this extra carbon dioxide and, of course, methane within our environments. Anyway, hope that's been a good video. Thank you for listening. Remember to take notes. Remember to stop, rewind, listen again. Fantastic.